everyone, and welcome to Anesthesia Coffee Break. I'm Lahiru.
Yep, and I'm Stan in the car.
In the car, yeah, that's right. Hey Stan, so there's a great opportunity. We've just had the primary exam results. Fortunately, lots of people did really well. Sadly, some people didn't make it this time. But they've now released the 2024 first sitting paper. And yeah, this will be a great opportunity to talk about that and talk about all the issues that we can with the exam and around the exam and the questions themselves. Yeah, what do you reckon, Stan?
I think that's a great idea. And I have actually done a detailed analysis of the exam over the last 10 years. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was the pass rates and the trend that's happening. So if you haven't read already, the overall pass rate for that last exam was 58%.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I think as a goal, we're trying to aim towards 80%, I think. Yeah. So 58%, when that number came out, I went, well, let's look at what the overall trend looks like since 2013. So looking back at the last over 10 years ago. And what it looks like is that there's a band of pass rates between 52 to 70% that has been sort of occurring. And it seems to sort of fluctuate in waves where it, crescendos at 52, goes up to 70, comes back down again, goes back up again.
Mm.
And I think there's an obvious pattern that's occurring, which can be due to two things. One is it has to do with the candidate's preparedness for the exam. And two is that the exam is evolving. So those are the things those are the two core ideas that I want to explore today.
Mm.
And I just want to know your thoughts in terms of your observations.
Yeah, definitely the exam changes. You can see the questions from decades ago was write short notes on propofol. And now it's, very different style of questions, very, much longer. And you can just imagine that's evolved in many ways, not just the questions, but the marking schemes, the strategies, the definitions of words as well as exactly what the examiners want from each question. And three things come to mind. Like, if the pass rate is always hovering around the 60% mark, I wonder, like, there's no curve, there's no exam curve for this, but I wonder if there's in an exam that has certain subjective components. I wonder if you cannot avoid having a curve. Like, say an examiner is marking all these written SAQs, so it's not an MCQ, which is very objective, and it's but the SAQs and vivas where it's such a discussion. There's lots of words being thrown around. Who knows which words you're hearing. Maybe the presentation of something makes a difference, or all these subjective variables. Maybe it's natural that there's a learning curve. And I wonder if there is evidence on that no matter what you do, there's a learning curve. There's definitely more knowledge required. And I wonder if that knowledge requirement has increased with the level of resources like Mac 95 and like, what we're doing and, all the really great websites out there. And so maybe it's inherently just a harder exam. And these things make it feel very, I don't know, makes me a bit sad actually that we can't get to that point where if people have the knowledge, then that they will just pass. But there's some kind of curve, and who knows what it will be in a couple of decades' time. We'll have to have a PhD in respiratory or cardiac physiology to have a level of pass, because it's just an arms race that keeps going up.
So, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I think that's been the frustrating part about this whole process, is that I think both of us want to help. And we know that in terms of preparedness, resources, there's no better time, I think, than now to be prepared for the exam. You've got Mac 95, which is an amazing resource, which every single trainee who's preparing for the exam should have. And then you've got an abundance, I think, of resources out there from previous candidates' notes. And every year it just gets better and better. So I think in terms of that aspect, with regards to how candidates prepare for themselves for the exam, I think the components are all there. So it begs the question, if that is improving in that area there, why don't we see an improvement in scores? And I think you've sort of hinted at it, is that perhaps there is a curve. And I think there is a natural involvement of the exam that's occurring where we need to respond appropriately. We need to sort of make the changes that I think can hopefully start improving the overall sort of pass mark.
But
And
the basic question: will we? It may never be something we can do if there's a learning curve. If there's an exam that gets harder and harder, if there's subjective learning curves that the examiners just go, oh, like like when we mark, we maybe the first person gets some level of, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, whatever, based on some objectivity, but based on some subjectivity. And then once the next 20 come through, we go, oh, that person was not as good as that. That person was not as good as that. Because unless the marking scheme is you said this and this and this, and I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think the examiners are marking off actual data points, because there's a lot of discussion in the primary exam. It's like teasing out concepts, and I
yeah,
don't know how we can.
we probably shouldn't delve in the area of how examiners mark, because we should actually get it from the examiners themselves. But I'm quite sure they've got a marking scheme. I think where we find it difficult is that where that transparency is, isn't it? What are the goals? What's your marking scheme? What's the criteria needed to score X amount?
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that ANSCA does psychometric testing on the questions. Like, I know that, speaking to examiners, they run it through their statistical, they've got companies that do this for them, which help delineate between what they determine to be a good question or a not so good question, or they call it like a differentiator between candidates that perform strongly and those that don't. And I think that's a hard one. Yeah. So, but what I think is that we as educators out there, we need to see how things are changing, and we need to evolve with them. And there's no doubt, I think, that it is going to be a cycle, that it is going to be one where we see the changes, we implement the changes or the positive differences that we think will help increase the pass rates. And we should naturally see that pass rate increase. And I think what's going to happen then is that as pass rates increases, then we're going to see another evolvement in terms of, all right, well, we're going to introduce new concepts, perhaps introduce different ideas, different ways of assessing. And then after that, we're going to see a downturn again. And then it's for us again to go and have a look and review and then respond. But I think it's just a natural process. I've really sort of come to that. I think that is the only way to reconcile this journey. Otherwise, it's hard, isn't it? I just don't know whether we can sort of sustain that that goal of 80% consistently. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one of the big problems is that, because we're both not examiners. We're just people that really like this stuff, and we feel like there's a space that people might want to learn things in a different way. Like let's say there's no resources out there. It would just be what we used to do, which is someone passes down their notes from previously. If you're lucky enough to have those notes, if you're lucky enough to have a study group, if you're in a tertiary center, if you have an examiner with you at the hospital or an ex-examiner, these are all the ways that you're protected from failing. What I think the internet has done, and we've done, and many other people have done, is just the make things more accessible. It's the democratization of
we've
knowledge.
Hopefully leveled the playing field in terms of resources and getting access to good educational materials.
But I think that our problem is we're just, so all of these things are just our hypothesis of what we think needs to be done. But we don't know what the variability is. We don't know how the exam is exactly done at any particular time. Yeah. And maybe that'd be quite nice. Like, imagine if we had more information, then we could tackle this learning in a better way. And ANSCA would say often that their role is accreditation, not teaching.
Mm,
some people don't say that in ANSCA, like they very much say, oh, we want to be a teaching body. But I think
yeah.
the line that I've got is that no, we're about accreditation, and that's come straight from the head. So yeah, it'd be nice if we could fly with a with a few more instruments, with a few more measurements, so that we knew what we were doing was useful.
Uh, 2 seconds while I just fix up my microphone here.
Easy.
So what I thought we'd do next is let's go through some of the ideas or insights that I've sort of had a think about over the changes from 2013 to 2024 with the exam. And then we can sort of give examples of the latest questions that have come out. And perhaps from there, moving forward, we can sort of think about ways that we can evolve the way that we approach this exam in terms of
Yeah,
the way that we learn. And perhaps also, I think for us, the way that we teach as well. I think that's some important lessons,
that's great.
hopefully.
Hey, Sensa, what's when the exam changed, and I think they said that we're going to make it far more, combined, pharm and phys combined, and more applied as well to the clinical situation. What have you noticed with that over the years?
So there's definitely an increased emphasis on what they call applied physiology and pharm. I think, as you said before, earlier when you looked at the earlier questions, a lot of it was just basic science, like write short notes, very sort of straightforward phys and pharm questions. And I think what we've seen over the last sort of decade is that there has been increasingly a lot more of these applied phys and pharm questions, expecting trainees to really relate concepts to clinical practice. Now, I've had a look, and from 2019, if you look at the physiology questions that have occurred, there's over 60% that are actually applied. Whereas when you look at the earlier years, let's say from like 2013, it was probably only about 45%. So you've seen that 50% increase, 15% increase in applied physiology questions. And one of them, and it doesn't mean that they don't occur in the past. Like, I think that's the key thing. It's just the number of questions that are occurring now versus back then.
Hmm.
And they certainly do get questions from the past which have an applied physiology or pharmacology slant. So the first example was question 1 in this 2024 B paper, which was explain the transfer of oxygen between alveoli and pulmonary capillaries and what may cause it to become diffusion limited. Now, this was a question that was actually asked in 2003, so 20 years ago. And I remember doing this question when I was preparing for my exam in 2008. So it just goes to show how long ago this question was. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that every year there's more and more questions being added to the bank. And we are always told when we started to always go back the last 10 years. Well, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that if you go back the last 10 years, you wouldn't have seen this question. So now it's really pushing back in terms of how far we need to go back. Like, do you go back 20 years? And then it's the issue of time. Like, how much time do you have? You don't, do you? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. So with the short answer questions, my tactic was actually to go back as to the start of where anesthesiamcq.com had SAQs. So I went back through
Yes.
every single SAQ. But yeah, for
Yes.
MCQs, I went back probably 12, 14 years.
Yeah.
And I just remember
Yeah.
the I think there was some paper that they'd released, which was the last 2 years, maybe, yeah, like 14 or 13 years. And I remember there being like one question from one of
Yeah.
those papers, and I was just so happy that rewarded itself. But yeah, for the SAQs, because you had to cover the syllabus strategy. I didn't do that. I just covered the SAQs as just hedging my bets on what was likely to be there most of the time, and it meant that I had to be more thorough. I think if you cover the syllabus, you'll be far more covered if you just did 10 years of SAQs, I suspect.
the syllabus is large. Like there's, over 330 learning objectives.
Mhm.
And like, I guess the question is, how long does it take to cover the syllabus?
Yeah.
Like are we heading to a point now where 12 months is not enough
Mm.
to prepare for the exam? That's almost like what I'm almost thinking.
Mm.
It's hard, isn't it? Because it's such a challenging exam and time of your life. You don't want to push it more than 12 months, do you?
No, no, absolutely. And say, yeah, so I think you're right, Sam. Like if imagine the knowledge base that you had to learn was so massive that now the
Mm,
exam took 18 months or, and increasingly more time for a large number of people to study. I think we've got to, as fans kid, we've got to kind of decide, is this what we want our trainees to be doing for their first 2 years of of basic training? Like, do we
yeah,
want them to be focusing on an exam that goes for that long? Or maybe we should adopt that format of, I think what happened with the opthal exam, it got so big that they had just multiple summative assessments going throughout the year.
yeah,
Smaller tasks, but it was chunked, it was manageable, and it allowed people to potentially have a better chance of passing, but there's just less quantity.
yeah.
Um,
I
yeah.
think that may be a model. I'm not sure, obviously, how quickly we can get that, but that may be something to look at probably the next, decade or so. Because I think you're right. Like the amount that we need to know now, I think, is increasing,
Mhm.
despite things being cut off. The learning objectives. It just feels as if, with how things are progressing, the depth, the understanding, it's more than what it was when I went through.
Yeah.
That's what I feel. Yeah.
So that probably leads
Um,
on well to your next point of, there's a shift from purely factual knowledge to integrated understanding. Um, yeah, from my impression, yeah, the short answer was far more just get some facts on a page, but then the
yep.
integrated understanding was often tested in the viva with that real kind of
Yes.
discussion happening, and the examiner's trying to tease out new facts that you may have not even realized from just reading the book, and they're trying to move you down an understanding pathway. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So that's the other sort of key part that's changed, is that no longer are questions segmented into their own domain. And I think more and more you start seeing these questions which require interdisciplinary understanding of both phys, pharm, and even the different sort of concepts in physiology. So really, in the last exam, the most obvious one is that new question 2, describe the mechanisms and consequences of aortocaval compression in pregnancy, which, funnily enough,
Mm.
feels almost like a second part question.
Yeah.
But you've got this clinical slant on a primary question, and you have to integrate both obstetric and cardiovascular physiology into this answer, and also have to also understand in terms of the maternal and fetal impacts, um, when applying those principles into your answer. So I think that's the challenge that's occurring, that I've seen also. And when you look at the integrated questions that are occurring, they probably account now for, I think, around a third of the questions. Whereas back 2012 to 2015, probably only about, I think, 10 to 15%. So you've almost seen them doubled in terms of their occurrence, these integrated questions.
Mm.
And that's the other big challenge, is to really, I think, look at your clinical work and see how the physiology and pharmacology is applied to that. And potentially these are where a lot of the questions are coming from.
It's probably a really good idea when you're in theater to, whatever the situation is, just construct a hypothetical SAQ and think about it, and write some notes, see if you can discuss it. Make your time in theater really productive.
Do you know, I've thought about this idea, and that was one of my suggestions as well, is that we need to be more proactive in terms of thinking about these clinical scenarios, which can become short answer questions.
Mm.
But what I think is really difficult is that it's easy for you and I to say that, right?
Yeah.
And even for myself as a consultant, then to go, all right, well, what are these questions? What are these clinical scenarios that we can apply physiology and pharmacology?
Mhm.
And the challenge is that if I find it challenging, how do we expect a trainee to be thinking about what these clinical scenarios are? And I think that's where that responsibility of education comes in.
Mhm.
I think it's shifting. Well, I think it needs to shift
Mhm.
because there was a point where we told trainees, it's up to you. It's up to you. You have to be accountable. You have to do this yourself. But I think it's become so challenging and difficult where I think some of that actually needs to fall on to us. Don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be in an ideal situation. That's what happens. But just imagine any combination of scenarios where, there's not many consultants, or it's a fast list versus slow list. And yeah, I mean,
It's a hard one, isn't it? And look, I would think there's only a finite amount of clinical scenarios.
hmm.
Don't you think? But albeit it's going to be
Oh,
vast.
there's going to be vast, yeah. But I mean, I think as a trainee, the way to approach it is to let's say you're going to a theatre list, which is a cesarean list,
Yeah.
and imagine just going, "Hey, consultant, I'm going to try and work on this question for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
and here are my notes. Could you just have a look at them once and the structure of what I've done, and just give me 1 minute of feedback, like to make it really seem easy for the consultant to give you feedback, like."
Yes.
Give me 1 minute of feedback. Here's the notes that I've provided to you, so you don't have to, go through your database or whatever it is that you've got. I think
Yes.
I think it goes a long way to, being proactive, because not every. I think most consultants. I could be wrong, but I think most consultants definitely don't want to remember the primary exam, or it's so far from the primary exam that they
Yes.
don't remember much. They're gonna need some refresher in front of them.
Do you know how to best do this? We got to start like a movement. You got to have like a catchy name. You got to call it the 10-1 movement. The 10-1 movement in anesthesia education. The 10-1 movement in terms of let's do 10 minutes of conceptual understanding or a short answer question, and then have 1 minute of feedback. So
Yeah.
I don't know, something like that along the lines. You can think about this.
It's probably like teaching on the run, isn't it? Where we're just trying to create moments where there's teaching, but teaching on the run for the primary exam might be very specific. But actually, that's not the craziest idea. To have some, some topics, written out topics or lessons or modules that
Yep.
any anaesthetist can just quickly look up and go, oh, hey, student, hey, primary exam trainee, what do you think of this? And they've just got all the discussion points and things already at their disposal. But that's probably just the notes that they studied from. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it could be something that we can build on, I guess, from the learning objectives that are there. That's where the foundation is sort of built on.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start creating a database of clinical questions that can be applied to these learning objectives. Yeah. And start like Hero's 10-1 movement. That's what we're going to do.
You came up with the name. It's all yours. Hey, so how about you've mentioned here the growth in respiratory and cardiovascular topics?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
the constant thing I get told is, man, we studied so much respiratory and cardiovascular, but they
Yes.
didn't ask a single question on that.
Yes, exactly. And I think that was the feedback that I was getting in the last exam, that there wasn't a core cardiovascular question being asked. And what I've noticed is that, yes, across the years, there has been consistent coverage of both respiratory and cardiovascular. But most recently, there've been a lot more, how would I say, peripheral, such as specific, ventilation ideas and perhaps even cardiovascular pathophysiology related to anesthesia. And the classical one is going to be question 3 in this exam, which is a new question, but it is a variant of previous question, but it is new in terms of classify the causes of shock and give examples of each. And then there was a focus
Mhm.
on outline the pathophysiology of septic shock.
Mhm.
Now, previous shock questions have been about hypovolemic shock.
Mhm.
So this one here was about septic shock. And you had to integrate your cardiovascular physiology into this. So this was a very nuanced question that was really surrounded around a clinical scenario of septic shock, which you also need to understand the pathophysiology of. So
Mm.
this was another challenging question that I think you can see sort of the trends in terms of where this is all occurring.
Yeah, wow. And I actually really like that. This is a great example of being more clear with the question. Like, it was, outline the pathophysiology of septic shock. Anyone could easily go into do not discuss. So it could easily go into compensatory responses, but the examiners have written here, do not discuss compensatory responses to shock. It's really nice to see that, because otherwise,
Yes.
imagine the number of people that would just go on that red herring and not even realize that was not part of the marking scheme. And you don't have any time to lose on this. You've got 10 minutes. If you go down the wrong path, then
Yes.
that's that question
I
lost.
agree. I think that certainly is better directive nowadays with short answer questions with regards to what they want and what they don't want. It's definitely there.
Mm.
But I think, at the end of the day, I always look at the results. I go, is it actually improving your pass rates? Is it actually improving your scores? And I think that's been maybe frustrating is not the right word, but that's been sort of the insightful part of this whole process is that, yeah, I see it. It's occurring. It's helpful,
Mm.
but it's not leading to an increase in pass rates. And then the question is, why? Why is that? Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think about, here the next point is there's a more focus on critical thinking in pharmacology.
Yes. And this is one of the things that I think has definitely changed, where previously it was with regards to pharmacology questions, you could get a question on like how or write short notes on tramadol, or what are the pharmacokinetics of a certain drug. And I think I've got like one from 2016, which was like describe the principles of how a computer controlled infusion device targets and maintains a constant effect site concentration of propofol. Whereas the version that came out in the most recent exam was on question 9.
Mhm.
This one here showed you a curve and showed you different curves. And then after that, it said the plasma concentration following the cessation of 4 mics per mils is shown with these curves.
Mhm.
And you had to have a discussion in terms of why these occurred at the 25, 50%, and 75% decrement time. And yeah, you got the picture there. And then after that, discuss the clinical application of these curves.
Actually, this is
Like
this is brutal. Look at this. So that was a 15%.
15%. Wow. I
This
mean,
will definitely be asked again very,
yes.
very, very soon, if not the next exam.
Well, it's one of those questions, isn't it? Like, at a 15% pass rate, is it a bad question, or is it that candidates weren't prepared for this?
Look at
What are your thoughts?
if you look at the spread. So I think the definition that people would have of differentiating is that if everyone passes the question, 100% pass is not a differentiator, and 0% pass is not a differentiator. But 15% pass. Look at this. Look at the spread. You're definitely differentiating people. I think this. I think examiners would say that this differentiates well, but we should get an examiner on to give feedback for this, shouldn't we?
Like, there's not even a 5 on this question. Only one person scored a 4.
Yeah, wow.
Look at that. And
Yeah,
you sort of think with a question like this that's sort of broken down into A and B, and also with regards to how you sort of segment your answer in terms of 1 to 5 hours,
hmm. This
you would have
this
thought perhaps, it'd be easier, but no, it's actually harder, isn't it?
this would definitely, this feels like a lot more knowledge than what we were expected to learn back more than 10 years ago. This looks detailed. So, do yourself a favor if you're about to sit the exam. please write a model answer for this? Because have you seen that, Stan? When you look at all the, I remember we our experience with if there's a poorly passed question in the immediate sitting, it was often, not always, but often repeated in the next sitting.
Yeah, interesting point in terms of what's the probability of a question being repeated sequentially from one exam to the other. So let's say this one here, will this be repeated in the 2025 first sitting? That probability is low. I've seen it perhaps once, maybe twice, but it's not a common occurrence. Now, will it happen in the one in August? That is, I think, a higher probability. But in saying that, you're right. This will probably be a question I need to sort of go through and workshop it, because you're absolutely right. 15% is way too low for that question there. And I think that I can understand why it's difficult, because there are, I think, it's one of those questions where there's perhaps only one way to answer the question. Does that make sense? So it doesn't give you that flexibility of perhaps, bringing other concepts to get other marks. I think that's the challenging part about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the increased attention on equipment and safety?
Yeah. That's the other big thing. When I went through, equipment was a part of the curriculum, and I would certainly worry about it, but the occurrence of equipment questions didn't occur at a frequent tick as it has now. And there certainly has been an increase, I think, in inclusion of equipment and safety questions since 2015. And I think you're almost guaranteed to at least get one equipment and safety question in each exam. And, the most recent one was question 15, draw and label a circle breathing system, including the bellows. Now, what made this challenging was that this was a two-part question. So this is how you can see the exams is evolving. Drawing a circle system was actually a question in itself 10 years ago. 2015, 2016, it was just draw and label a circle breathing system.
Yeah.
Right. The second part of the question was describe how an active scavenging system works. And that in itself was a separate question, which is in 2014. So now you've got two of these as one question.
It's kind of nice, but it means that they're expecting less from each, right? Like you literally
I know you say that, right? But imagine if you went and prepared a 10-minute answer for describe an active anesthetic gas scavenging system, and then I told you, put that down in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the big challenge, is that how do you go about when you've prepared a 10-minute answer to go back down and go, all right, well, what do I need to cut out in my 5-minute answer? Like, I think everything's important in this 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's challenging. I don't know. I don't have an answer to it. Well, not now. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Let's go to the, so here is the, let's say the primary exam, question 15. 40% candidates pass this question, answer domain, so correctly drawn and labeled diagram. So that feels like that would be maybe the easiest part of it. So it looks like you literally just have to draw a diagram and label it. There's not much else that seems to be linked to that first question. And then scavenging is coupled to the manual APL valve on the bag limb and the ventilator's APL valve equivalent. So somehow we've got to either probably mention that or diagrammatically represent that. And then the description of how active scavenging works. So, I will go through this. Low resistance tubing connects from both the manual and ventilator APL valves to a reservoir chamber. This reservoir is open at one end so that no back pressure can build up. Suction can entrain room air continually so that no negative pressure can be applied directly to the circuit. Suction is attached to the reservoir chamber. Scavenging gases are vented out the roof of the hospital. Safety valves prevent any positive or negative pressure developing within the scavenging system. and then outline the purpose of scavenging. So anything additional was detail and breadth of answer, diagrams to enhance the description of scavenging, and specifying the diameter of scavenging connections. Yeah, wow, that would be I think.
So
Go on.
yeah, reading the examiner's report, it very much sounds like most of your marks actually came from the scavenging question.
Only because not most of the marks, isn't it? It'll be 5 and 5. This is an example of two parts of the question, five each, but only because they only had to write one line saying correctly drawn and labeled diagram.
Yeah, okay.
That could be many lines of data, right?
Yes. But I assume that I think the rule is that if it doesn't say what the proportion of marks is between the A and B, it's split 50-50, isn't it? So you would have to spend 5 minutes on drawing the circle breathing system and then 5 minutes on talking about the active scavenging gas system, which there's a lot there, isn't there?
There's a lot there.
It feels like a 10-minute answer to me, but
this is interesting. Let's go through the problems and errors. Many diagrams contain serious errors, omissions. Fair enough. Many diagrams were poorly labeled, so you needed some kind of explanation with the diagrams. It seems scavenging is coupled both. So this seems like something that's mentioned in the text, in the answer as well as in the errors, that coupled to both the manual APL and to the ventilator's APL valve equipment, fresh gas is being added continually to the circle breathing system. And this must have a means to escape. This is one of the functions of APL valves, fair enough. Scavenging is coupled to these to collect this waste gas to prevent pollution of the operating theatre. Note that the manual APL valve has no function at all when the ventilator is in use, of course. The most common omission is the lack of scavenging from the back of the ventilator.
Oh, when drawing the circle breathing system.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Scavenging systems are designed such that suction cannot be applied directly to the breathing system. This is why a reservoir chamber is required. Yeah, because otherwise you can get a negative pressure problem there. Many candidates drew variations of scavenging arising directly from inspiratory or expiratory limbs of the circle. Some candidates claim that scavenging enables recycling of volatile agents. Some candidates claim that waste gas is stored somewhere or transported away. Nope, sadly, it's just piped up into the atmosphere. Many answers overstated the occupational hazard posed by inhalation agents to clinical staff. Scavenging has no role in minimizing pollution of the Earth's atmosphere. Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, there have been a lot of research with regards to scavenging of gases, and I know that there's the Environmental Committee, which does talk about recycling of anesthetic gases through scavengers. And I know, I think we've got a colleague, I think, in our department who does some research on that, Richard, with regards to the gases. So
we'll get him on.
Yeah, I guess that's where some of these sort of concepts come from, but it does require an additional feature of the scavenging system to actually do all that, probably beyond the requirements to answer this question here.
Yeah. So Stan, the next part here is just the growing complexity in the SAQs. Well, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is definitely a point that you've observed and I've observed as well, is that from one question, now you get different breakdowns of questions. And you can see it as a good or bad thing. And there definitely requires, I think, a lot more analysis, synthesizing of information. And, the classic one is question 10, where they ask you some basic fundamentals, such as describe oral bioavailability, describe the factors that influence oral bioavailability, but then they've applied a clinical question or a case-based scenario at the end. So use one example to illustrate the clinical application of oral bioavailability, albeit it's only worth 10%, which means that you should spend only 1 minute on this question. But I think that is the trend that I see that's occurring with these multi-segmented questions.
I've got personally, I think that's great. I wish the short answer question was just these, small 1-2 mark questions, and you just had to put an answer down. Because then it's really clear what you want, and it's very easy to mark. So there's less subjectivity, I think. I just feel like that's the way the exam should go for this.
You think so? You would think so, right? But I kind of feel like subjectivity often lends itself to, yeah, it lends itself either way. But what I don't see with these multi-component questions is a higher pass rate. I just don't think there's that association that's come through that if you do um, a multi-component question, your pass rates are higher than a single question. And this is just an observation.
Mm.
And yes, I think it's much clearer to have defined questions with regards to the goals that you want with the answer that's required to pass. I think you're absolutely right. But what I also think is that it hasn't translated across to a higher pass rate. Like the pass rates are still, less than 50%.
Mm.
So that's the other interesting point, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That is interesting. This question here was 43% of candidates received to pass. But I mean, I'm okay with that. I think I constantly just think that if people knew exactly what was asked, so in this question, maybe people knew exactly what was asked and
Yep.
they didn't know it. And that's fair, But
Yep.
maybe another question like that sepsis one, where you're not meant to talk about the compensatory mechanisms, imagine someone knowing the answer, but not knowing that the question wasn't asking not to talk about something, then that's my problem. So whatever it is, you don't know, but as long as the question is completely understandable and there's
Yep.
there's no variance on how people perceive the question, but it's so obvious.
Yes.
I think that's where it is. I mean, just to give an example, like the fact that there's all those terms, define, describe,
Mm,
discuss, contrast, compare and
mm,
contrast. These have statements next to them in the guidelines that
mm.
you know
What they mean.
yeah, what they mean. But my problem is that they're English words. We already know what they mean. They shouldn't have to be
Mm.
redefined. If they'd be redefined, why not just take an extra few words to ask exactly
Make
what
it
you're
make
asking?
it clear, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
make it clear. I don't think that there's a lot. You don't need it. You shouldn't need a key to define words that already, like you never look at a map and go, you know, what is it? Water is water. Like ocean is ocean. Like there's nothing
Maybe for
like
the
that.
first time. I don't know. Yeah, but
That's
I
not a
absolutely
thing.
know what you mean.
You
Absolutely
know
know
what I
what you
mean,
mean.
right?
I
It's
absolutely know
so
what you mean.
weird.
Like, yeah, sometimes it does feel it is an English exam, which is why I think the exam is hard for candidates where English is not your first language.
Oh, just to be clear, I don't think it's an English exam. I think it's a redoing English exam.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
an English exam is if they, or a language exam is if they said define is another. It's not.
Yes,
It
I know
doesn't
what
mean
you mean.
define anymore. Yeah.
Look, it's even hard for me who speaks English at home, I guess, like imagine if you didn't, your mother tongue wasn't English. This would be challenging
Yeah.
if you were redoing it. But anyway,
uh, and the next point you make here, then, Stan, is diversity and anatomy and physiology representation.
yeah. So
Talk about that.
there definitely is a higher representation of anatomical questions here. If you don't see it in the short answer questions, you're going to see it in the MCQs. And I think that there was a note made on the MCQs that there were errors with regards to anatomical relations of the thyroid gland, anatomy of the nasal turbinates. So it's safe to say that with anatomy questions, most likely they're going to appear, I think, in the MCQs. But I have seen, over the last couple of years, short answer questions, with label this picture or draw a certain diagram. So
Hmm.
that is definitely a focus that I think sort of moving forwards. And
Yeah.
like equipment and safety and anatomy, you could probably count that there's one sort of question each from each one of those domains.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
Stan, you got some great notes here. So shall we move on to how on earth do we improve pass rates? And
Yes. I mean,
is
that's
it
the
at
main
all
thing. That's the
possible?
main thing of today. We've talked about, I think, the changes that are occurring. I think we want to assume, or I have to believe that trainees are committed. They are learning better, learning more efficiently, and they're well resourced. Like I want to come from that standpoint.
Actually,
Yeah.
to come from that standpoint, it means that they're giving up social media, so there's no doom scrolling. I mean, there's so many more distractions now, so that you
Yeah.
could assume that, but I reckon there's just as many distractions, if not more now than before. So
It's just different, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
when we were training, Yeah, the distractions were
Did,
completely different than they
did
are
you get rid
now.
of? I unplugged my TV. I was like, yep, that's not happening. The sad thing was I ended up going on YouTube rabbit holes for most of my time, but still, you know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
correct. I think that time, it wasn't TikTok, it was YouTube. YouTube was the new sort of medium that sort of came out where you could spend hours just
Just delete.
procrastinating.
Hey,
Yeah.
I went to see Mark Manson speak. He's the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F, and it
Oh,
was
you've spoken about this author before. Yeah, with
uh,
regards to
probably yeah.
how you go about approaching life, approaching anything in your domain that you want to improve on. But yeah, tell me about
Yeah.
what the important things that you learned.
He said this is the biggest takeaway was if you follow what he says, it's it's all very reasonable philosophy and stuff. But one thing he says is don't try to change things. Like just do experiments, and it makes it a lot more manageable and less maybe daunting. So, for example, if you want to give up social media, don't say you're going to give up social media. Just say I'm gonna experiment not having social media for a week. Just delete whatever you need to delete, or turn off your notifications, take it off your homepage, and just try for a week and see how you feel, or a month and see how you feel, and then go, oh, that felt good. That I didn't see any downside to that. Let's try for another month. So you're just doing lots of experiments, and maybe with study you could do the same thing. I'm gonna not drink caffeine for a week. I'm not going to go on Instagram or TikTok or anything for a week. And just, I
Okay,
feel like that's
just to
manageable.
get that step going. Yeah.
Yeah.
But as a contrarian,
Oh,
what happens if your experiment fails? What happens if you have withdrawal symptoms at the end of one week, and at the end of the week you're like, oh my god, that
that's,
I really missed it, and this was
and that's fine.
fantastic. What do you do
That's,
then?
that's totally fine. That means that the experiment showed you that it didn't, maybe it didn't work for you. But I wouldn't say
Yep.
withdrawal is the metric, but yeah, let's say you did get withdrawal and said, oh, how do I feel about this withdrawal? Is it
Yes.
unmanageable? How am I doing with study? Is that even better, even though I've got
Yes.
withdrawal? And if you balance it all out, at the end of the day, you just go back to what you're doing. Nothing's lost.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Like one of the key ideas that you, I think, introduced was the idea of atomic habits. By James Clear.
Yep.
They're talking about when you want to make change, it's about making change slowly, like
Yes.
not just a big change, but you do it like, let's say I'm going to go back and do running, right?
Mhm.
So with running, I'm not going to run my 10Ks that I used to do in 2019. What I'll do is, I'll do like 1K and then 2Ks and then 3Ks. So just put it up slowly. But I think that's really, really helpful.
Hmm.
That was a really sort of good suggestion that you had in one of your previous episodes.
Good.
Have you met James?
No, but if he, look, I don't think I'm, there's some people that you just become a real fan of. I
Yes.
really love his stuff, but I never got that into,
Yes.
but no, yeah, really,
That's good.
really interesting things.
All right. Well, let's go to the recommendations that I think are
Okay.
required now to improve the pass rates. And they're going to be hard. So I need your help on this because I've got some ideas, but it's a two-way street. Like it's not all going to be from the trainees. It has to also come from the consultant body as well, or like the answer body. Yeah.
Hmm. Go for it.
Well, why don't you mention it and then I'll talk about it.
Yeah, sounds good. So your first step is incorporate more applied scenario-based study.
Yes. And this is what I was talking about where, you go into theater, you've got a scenario that's happening, like let's say you're inducing an obese patient. What are the pharmacology concepts with regards to dosing an obese patient?
Yeah,
And that is how I think this learning needs to occur.
that's great. Hey,
But the challenge is, it can't be obviously driven by the trainee. Yeah.
I think it has to because, so from my point of view, it's the trainees thing at stake. If you're
Yep.
not driving it, then the consultant really has no vested interest in doing this. Like it's one consultant with one trainee. Sure, for the
Yes.
department, it's as an overall, it's a difficult thing to have trainees fail and not move through the process. But I just think it should be trainee led. But I mean, just to give some examples, like literally anything can be some level of applied scenario based study. Like
Mm.
whether it's an obese patient exam, like so the aim should be just do one scenario based thing per session, maybe even per day. Just have it really, there's again James Clear. You just do one thing every day,
Yep.
those little atomic habits, so atoms build up everything else. So those,
Yep.
you become the person that passes an exam by just practicing, and each question you do is a vote in the direction for a person passing exam, if you know what I
Yep.
mean.
Yep.
So imagine you've started TIVA. The next question is, what is TIVA? How does TIVA change in obesity or in pediatrics?
Yep.
Another question might be, what are the ventilation strategies that I would have for an obese patient? And you could just be picking up vasopressor and just thinking, how does phenylephrine? What are my options? How does medrominal compare to ephedrine, compare to phenylephrine when it comes to
Yes.
hypertension management? And these are all really useful things that can be predictably on the exam, because that's all the examiners have to go by is what they're doing every day, which is giving
Yes.
anesthetics. So I think it could go a long way of doing that.
Well, what can we do? What do you think? Yeah, we can also do to help facilitate
We
this.
we could. I mean, it wouldn't be too hard. If like everything starts small, just like I've said, hey, why don't you just do it once a day? We could both just do this for our trainees once a session, and we could collate that into a database that then we can give to make it accessible to trainees to give to their
Okay.
consultants.
All right.
That's
Let's
that's
do it.
cool.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
that's
Let's
cool.
let's start this 10-1 movement. Yeah.
The 10-1
So
movement.
the 10-1 movement, the 10-1 movement in education by La and Stan.
And to be honest, like it would be good for the trainees, obviously, because we're asking them to do something. But
Yep.
whatever answers they come up with, that can form part of the content in this wiki type site where things keep improving. So maybe the first edition might be pretty shit. Like have a
You got to start
question.
somewhere, right?
You got to start somewhere. And as we add more questions and refine questions, it could become a nice little database that anyone can use, which includes introductory trainees, GP anesthetists overseas that are, doing the exam. So, and it's applied
Yeah.
as well. I've started building up a set series of physiology and pharmacology talks, but they're very much just the essences of primary exam stuff, but for the practical stuff, not
Yep.
not going into any great detail, like
Yes.
mainly at a resident or introductory trainee level. But it's there's so much good stuff that's really applicable.
Yes.
My vision would be for it to be this is what you'd need, and it could be quite a large amount of information, but not as large as maybe the primary exam. This is the information you need to know from basic pharmacology and physiology to be a good anesthetist. Like
Yep.
that would be my aim with
Yep.
that.
That sounds amazing. All right.
Mm.
Let's get this done.
Okay, focus on critical thinking skills.
And I think that just segues itself to that first idea where you want to create like problem sets or framework in terms of where you start thinking about why do you do what you do. So for example, yesterday we had a patient there who was fit, young and well and being induced, and the trainees chose a certain dosage, and then you ask yourself, or you ask them actually, like, why did you choose the dosage that you chose, or even the sequence of events in terms of how you chose it. So I think that's really interesting to sort of talk about, and perhaps even delve a little bit further with regards to the phys and the farm. And again, very much based on the idea of the applied scenario-based study, and then with that, applying some critical thinking skills associated with it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
How about developing structure answer techniques?
Okay. So this one here, I think what we need to do moving forward is with any sort of short answer questions, we always create structures for them. And I think what is important now is to understand that the structures themselves or the framework can become like a subset question. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when you, I think, create like your notes, make sure that you highlight each subheadings. And I think that allows you to compartmentalize a question into this is, this subheading will take me 3 minutes to write, 4 minutes to write, 3 minutes to write. And I think that allows you to critically apply a broad question into subsets. Because there's no doubt these subset questions are not well done. Despite them providing more clarity in terms of what's required. As I said, their pass rates just don't correlate with that. And I think that's probably a way forward with that.
Yeah, good. I think those are the main recommendations you had.
Yeah. And I think overall, I'm hopeful that we can still sort of do it in a 12-month schedule. If you've seen the schedules that I have out there, I've got 3 phases, which is essentially a coverage phase, and then there's like a revision phase, and then there's an exam preparation phase that leads up to the exam. And I think moving forward, what there needs to be is an understanding that when you build that foundation during that coverage phase, that there also needs to be a layer of integration and integrating it into your day-to-day practice. And I think that's the really hard bit. I always tell it to all, to trainees that you need to integrate what you learn into your everyday practice. But I can see it's so hard. Like, they've got so many things happening. We need to guide them. I think we need to create a framework that can allow this to happen. So, and then after that, just practice and review. And I guess the question is doing the last 10 years worth of papers enough? And I don't know. I can't answer that anymore. Like, I feel like there's now an abundance. Like, you could probably go like 20 years if you have the energy to.
But Stan, you're doing the syllabus, right? So you're covering all the points.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
which is covering more than 20 years.
Well, interestingly enough, it is very hard to cover the syllabus in 1 year.
Yeah.
I think there are many trainees that I've talked to who do talk about that they're not able to sort of cover that content within that time frame.
Yeah.
That's the other challenge. And so it's often a hybrid of both covering the majority of the syllabus and also covering it through short answer questions. I was told there was a bank of short answer questions now that have been tied to the learning objectives.
Isn't that just Mac 95?
I don't know whether they've got each of the short answer questions tied to a learning objective though, because now I don't know whether you've noticed in the short answer question in the examiner's report, under each short answer question, they've actually got the learning objective that's associated with it. That never used to occur. But I think that would be useful sort of moving forward if there was a database where it tied the short answer question to the learning objective. And that would be probably a much easier way, not an easier way, but a way to sort of cover the content. Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, those are our thoughts sort of moving forward. So we've got a lot to do, La, you and I.
Do we? Okay.
Well, there's so much room for improvement. I think that, you got to start somewhere, as you said. And I'm hopeful that the next sitting, hopefully we can sort of start seeing again an increase in the rise in pass rates. And I think it's just going to be one of the processes where it just needs constant review, constant updating in terms of what we do. And that's what life is, isn't it? Just about that whole cycle of learning and changing and adapting.
Oh, Stan, that's a lovely philosophy to have. So we sign off. We'll have a talk offline just about how to start with this. But I think that's a good session. Thanks to everyone for listening and watching this Anesthesia Coffee Break. See you next time, and good luck with all your study. Now, what's new with ABCs of Anesthesia is that we're forming a whole bunch of very comprehensive courses for every stage of your anesthetic journey, from medical student to procedural skills, from foundations in anesthesia, as well as really important exam lectures and clinical anesthesia courses as well.